There's a scene midway through Mr. Mom where stay-at-home dad Jack Butler is gathered around his kitchen table playing poker with neighborhood housewives. And instead of betting with money, they're using coupons.
Okay, I'm going to bet 25-cent Wheaties rebate. I'm going to raise the Van de Kamp's pork and beans and Novocaine.
Well, I'm going to see your 25-cent Wheaties rebate and raise you 2 tender victuals $1 offs, okay? That's it for me. I'll fold.
Jack, why are you dealing me this garbage? I'm out.
This is so much more fun than bridge, Jack. Thanks so much for thinking of it.
Girl.
Come on, are you going to play cards or flap your gums?
It's getting ugly in here.
Welcome to Pretty and Podcast, a podcast where I revisit the career of John Hughes. This isn't a review podcast. Instead, I trace how the film got made and some aspect of the film's creation that struck a chord with me. In my next episode, I'll be talking about the origins and behind-the-scenes production of Mr. Mom, but for this episode, I'm going to do something a little different and talk specifically about one man, Robert Kovoloff. His name doesn't appear in the credits for Mr. Mom, nor does it appear in almost any of the hundreds of films that he was involved with. In fact, his IMDB page lists 7 films. Robert Kovoloff worked in promotions, or product placement, and Mr. Mom was a movie made at the height of Kovoloff's influence, and may have included more successful product placements than any other film under his influence. Product placement, or embedded advertising in movies, dates back to film's earliest origins. In 1896, at the request of Lever Brothers, the Lumiere brothers produced Laveuses, also known as Washing Day in Switzerland, a short commercial film featuring Sunlight soap. Perhaps more relevantly was in 1920, when the logos for Red Crown Gasoline, Zeroline, and Firestone appeared in the Fatty Arbuckle film The Garage. Or, more explicitly, when in 1925, the Corona Typewriter Company arranged a deal to have one of their typewriters appear in the feature film The Lost World. Even the first film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, Wings, in 1927, starring Clara Bow, spent about 20 seconds with a Hershey's almond milk chocolate bar. There are 2 types of product placements in film. There are products donated to reduce production costs, and products placed in exchange for compensation. And within these 2 types, there are further subtypes or classifications, basic and advanced placement. Basic placement is when the logo or brand name appears in the shot, but the characters don't draw attention to it. And advanced placement is when a product is mentioned by name, usually, but not always, in a positive light, like the coupons in the poker scene.
Come on.
All right. I will see you your tender victuals, and I'll raise you a 50-cent Yoplait and a $2 rebate on a Domino's pizza and 2 for 1 Sun Pure frozen entree. How about that?
Uh-oh.
It's serious poker.
Any of you ever try those Sun Pure frozen entrees? Oh, my dog wouldn't eat them.
I love them. I do.
Product placement has long been a part of film history, but at no time was this embedded advertising more explicit than in the 1980s. In 1978, the average film budget was roughly $5 million, but by 1980, that figure had more than doubled thanks to inflation, the rising costs of shooting on location, and the emergence of big-budget blockbusters like Jaws in 1975 and Star Wars in 1977. And producers were looking for ways to bring down costs. And this is when we meet Robert Kovoloff. Robert Kovoloff got his start in the early 1970s as a radio ad executive for WGN in Chicago. After leaving WGN, he attempted to start his own business and for a time was in Texas selling art. Then, in 1975, he took a job that would change his career. It was at American International Pictures, promoting the Peter Fonda film Highballin'. Kovolov's job was to go through the script and identify potential brand name products which could be used in the film. When he noted how excited companies were to have their products in the movies, he decided to turn it into a full-time career. And in 1977, Kovoloff moved to Hollywood and established Associated Film Promotions, which he ran, at first, out of his apartment. Kovoloff would get up every day at 5 a.m. to cold call East Coast marketing and PR executives and spend each afternoon writing follow-up letters. Eventually, an executive at 20th Century Fox gave Kovoloff a chance and secured his services for the film Butch and Sundance, the early years. Kovoloff managed to secure one client, Tony Lama, the boot company, who produced custom boots for each of the film's actors, including Tom Berenger and William Catt. With a one happy client, word went out, and soon Kovoloff built a list of clients, including Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company, Quaker State Motor Oil, who all wanted their products placed in motion pictures. It was Kovoloff who was responsible for Nick Nolte tossing a salad with Bertolli olive oil in the 1979 film North Dallas 40, for Sylvester Stallone eating a bowl of Wheaties in Rocky III in 1982, and for Michael Keaton attempting to quietly purchase beltless Kotex maxi pads in Mr. Mom.
Half pound of salami, half pound of Swiss, half pound of Virginia ham, 2 celery. Oh, I think these are on special.
Doesn't matter. Sorry, real.
Let me check. Are these Kotex maxi pads on special?
Never mind, sorry, forget it.
Kotex, 19 cents off.
Thanks.
By 1980, Kovolov's Associated Film Promotions was grossing roughly $1.5 million a year and represented 50 companies with roughly 150 products who'd pay an annual retainer of between $25,000 and $60,000 or more to have their products placed in 5 movies a year guaranteed, and as many as 30. And by 1984, his client list had grown to 74 companies. For his clients like General Mills, Procter & Gamble, Fisher Stereos, Playboy, Brown & Williamson, and Beatrice Foods, Kovoloff would promise positive visibility. For a Kovoloff client like Anheuser-Busch, it was far easier and cheaper to get a bottle of, say, Michelob into the hands of Clint Eastwood, like in the 1980 film Any Which Way You Can, than footing a $250,000 bill for 5 primetime commercial spots. Across 2 years, Associated Film Promotions got Anheuser-Busch products into 70 films.
Some things speak for themselves.
Kovoloff would tell clients, "Your product ought to be in pictures. In a paid television commercial, you know it's not real. But in a movie kitchen, that box of Cheerios looks natural in a cluster of other brand name products. In fact, television programs look bland because they're prohibited from showing the brand names that are an integral part of everyone's lives." Kovoloff bragged that he was successful in placing his clients' products in 8 out of every 10 films, all of them with a happy ending. Kovoloff couldn't guarantee that the product placement wouldn't be left on the cutting room floor, but in the best cases, a product may play a starring role in a scene. It might be mentioned by name in a restaurant, or the product packaging might be used as a key prop or hero prop in a scene, like Van Camp's chili in Mr. Mom.
You crazy? You fed a baby chili?
Furthermore, it would hardly matter if the movie flopped. Though a film might review poorly or bomb at the box office, it was estimated that with subsequent viewings on television, foreign markets, airline flights, and videocassette, upwards of 70 million people could see the product's placement. This placement, Kovoloff said, only lent to a film's believability.
Where's Bobby keep the extra diapers?
The new directors and producers want reality. Real people do not drink beverages without names, and they don't use other no-name products either. Brand names make scenes believable. The old movie code was, why give away valuable advertising for nothing? Today, almost everybody in the film business wants reality. And corporations have come to understand the power of proper product placement. It's an amazing change. But seeing your product in a dramatic movie setting which already has people emotionally involved leaves a strong and lasting impression. It is a lot more powerful than hitting the viewer with paid, contrived advertising. Prior to the mid-1970s, product placement in film was haphazard. Set dressers and property managers would have to hit up companies individually for products or props. With product placement companies like Kovoloff's, who worked on between 160 to 200 films a year, studios could save valuable time and energy by simply allowing product brokers like Kovoloff to supply them. By 1981, Kovoloff had built up a staff of 31 people, including those known for insider contacts within the movie industry, like Dudley Ace Holmes, who was a property master on Fast Times at Ridgemont High. His product agents, who read hundreds of scripts a year, would flag scenes with bathrooms that might be filled with the cleaning products they represent, or highways that could use a billboard, and pitch his clients' products. Kovoloff also invested more than $200,000 into a large warehouse where property masters could come to select from more than 10,000 products, including food and beverages, signage, and appliances. Think of movies like E.T., or the more recent Netflix series Stranger Things, and how integral the placements of Reese's Pieces and Eggo waffles are to each of them, or how even defunct companies like Pan American Airlines have brand recognition that outlives the company itself, thanks to films like Blade Runner in 1982 and the reappearance of the Pan Am brand in Blade Runner 2049. For Mr. Mom, Kovoloff claimed to have placed nearly 40 brands belonging to his clients, from Van Camp's chili with beans to Tide laundry detergent. When John Hughes wrote the coupon poker scene for Mr. Mom, which was in his initial script, Hughes simply went to a drawer in his kitchen, found some coupons, including one from Folgers Coffee and Green Giant Vegetables, and inserted them into the dialogue. But by the time the scene was shot, every coupon used in the scene belonged to one of Kovoloff's clients.
I'm calling you with the 25-cent new and improved band roll-on and two 50-cent triple-ply hefty bag offers. What do you got?
She's bluffing.
One product, however, Kovoloff was unable to place in Mr. Mom was Anheuser-Busch's Budweiser. They told us they were going to leave Bud out because they can't use all of our clients in one movie, but that's fine. Bud will be in lots of others. You can't have everything. Mr. Mom was made at the height of Kovoloff's influence in Hollywood. In 1983, Kovoloff's Associated Film Promotions was the oldest and largest product placement firm in the business, that year adding even more clients to its roster, like General Motors, Cadillac, Burger King, and Kodak. By the mid-'80s, however, there were roughly 30 or 40 independent placement companies operating in the industry, and most studios had developed some kind of in-house product placement or merchandising departments. There was even the time in 1982 when Coca-Cola bought 49% of Columbia Pictures and would place its products in all of their films, until they sold their stake to Sony in 1989. As Kovoloff's share of business diminished, he was seemingly unable to adapt, believing that if you jumped off a bridge, you'd land on your feet. As his share of the industry shrank, Kovoloff's Associated Film Promotions struggled to compete in the very industry that he had pioneered, and he'd filed for bankruptcy in 1992 with nearly $1.5 million owed to nearly 100 creditors. This should be where the story ends. However, 2 years later, in May 1994, an anonymous FedEx box was delivered to Dr. Stanton Glantz at the University of California that would see Kovoloff's name back in the spotlight. The box held roughly 8,000 pages of documents belonging to Brown & Williamson, the third largest tobacco company in the country, who manufactured Kool and Pall Mall cigarettes. The documents showed that the tobacco industry had known for 30 years about the dangers of smoking, and Glantz shared the documents with members of Congress and the press. But as interest in the documents grew, Karen Butter, deputy director of the university's library, came up with a practical solution to the overwhelming requests for access to the documents. Put them online. The press latched onto the story, and among the more popularly shared documents were those documenting special payments through Associated Film Promotions to actors like Paul Newman, Clint Eastwood, and Sean Connery, including a 1983 then confidential agreement between Brown and Williamson and Sylvester Stallone. Stallone had promised to use Brown and Williamson cigarettes in 5 films for $500,000. The agreement was printed on Associated Film Promotions letterhead. This is now known as influencer marketing. It's a form of marketing that puts products in the hands of opinion leaders or celebrities in the hopes of influencing potential buyers. Though this style of product placement had its roots in the 1940s and 50s, changes in advertising laws introduced in the 1970s that banned cigarette advertising from radio and television made this form of marketing especially appealing to tobacco companies like Brown and Williamson, who would otherwise be unable to show their products on television. Unfortunately for Kovoloff, right around the time Mr. Mom was being released into theaters in the summer of 1983, Brown and Williamson had requested an audit in early August. Their fees had increased from a $50,000 annual retainer in 1979 to costs ranging upwards of $213,105.28 in 1982. When factoring in special placements and retainers, all told, Brown and Williamson had given over $965,000 to Associated Film Promotions, including the personal retainer to Sylvester Stallone, and wanted to know exactly how that money was being spent. The audit raised concerns, but it also outlined the lengths that tobacco companies were willing to go to put their products in the hands of celebrities. During a field visit, Associated Film Promotions personnel presented Brown and Williamson auditors with 2 sets of books, one of them that only Robert Kovoloff and Senior VP James Ripslinger were aware of. That second set of books was to track special payments made to producers in the form of cash, jewelry, and cars. It should be noted, wrote Brown and Williamson auditor D.L. Chavers, quote, that this second set of books appeared to have been prepared solely for the auditor's visit. End quote. There were no records that indicated in what movies Brown and Williamson products were placed, nor which movies Associated Film Promotions had attempted to place their products. And with the exception of the written agreement with Sylvester Stallone, Associated Film Promotions had virtually no written records of placement attempts. These unrecorded payments, Brown and Williamson feared, could, quote, be construed as aiding and abetting tax evasion. Curiously, despite these facts, the audit initially recommended continuing the relationship with Associated Film Promotions, since any negative publicity would be aimed at the whole industry, and because their competitors could gain a significant edge if Brown and Williamson stopped pursuing product placement. Keep in mind, Brown and Williamson had been working with Associated Film Promotions for 5 years without demanding reports or written records of placement. So, Brown and Williamson proposed an amended contract for 1983 with new, stricter conditions. But, a year later, on January 11, 1984, they canceled their agreement with Kovoloff. Not only were they unhappy with Associated Film Promotions, but they had been facing pressure from anti-smoking groups that had been pressed into action in part because of an ad placed in theaters for the Brown and Williamson product Cool Cigarettes, which ran before G-rated screenings of a theatrical reissue of Walt Disney's Snow White in July of 1983. 10 years later, as the Brown and Williamson documents surfaced online, newspaper reporters, including Los Angeles Times reporter Myron Levin, began to pore over them. The lack of written deals, unusual forms of payment, and the lawsuits surrounding Associated Film Promotions' bankruptcy brought, according to Levin, Kovoloff's bumpy career into focus. Levin followed up on the gifts listed in Brown and Williamson's 1983 audit. A record for one canceled check for $42,307 written to Otto Stiegler Incorporated, a car dealership in Encino, California, reportedly for a Mercedes convertible for actor Paul Newman, Levin found was delivered to Kovoloff, not Newman. And the cars and jewelry reportedly bought for Eastwood and Connery either didn't exist or didn't make it to the actors. Stallone's representatives neglected to comment. Connery's attorneys denied receiving any form of payment, and an Eastwood spokesman called the audit entry a mistake. Though he may have received payment, he didn't receive a car. There were also payments demonstrative of a company trying to keep their business afloat. One payment, for $13,000, went to pay David Levy, a real estate agent, for a down payment and rent on a West Los Angeles office and warehouse space. In the AFP records, David Levy was listed as an assistant producer for the movie Tank, but Tank did not have an assistant producer or any relationship to David Levy. Kovoloff's response when asked about the Brown & Williamson audit, and I'm paraphrasing from more than one source, basically says, "Sean Connery never got any jewelry. Paul Newman never got a car. Sylvester Stallone never got a car. Clint Eastwood never got a car. They never got a thing from me. The listing is bogus. A lot of stuff could have been made up." In response to congressional hearings in 1989, by 1990, the Cigarette Advertising Code, which is a voluntary code written by tobacco companies, was amended to no longer allow paid placement in movies. And in 1998, the Master Settlement Agreement was reached between the 4 largest tobacco companies and the attorney generals of 46 states, releasing an additional 1,500 pages of formerly secret tobacco industry documents to the public. These documents listed 188 actors, directors, and other celebrities who were furnished with free tobacco. There is no mention outside of the leaked Brown & Williamson documents of other gifts such as cash or cars made to celebrities, and as far as I was able to tell, no other tobacco company performed an audit on their product placement firms, at least none that were made public. If the practices of alternate payments were widespread, Robert Kovoloff would be the only public example of this industry practice. Robert Kovoloff died of heart failure on July 28, 1999. At the height of Kovoloff's success, he had offices in London and Canada, and there are hundreds of films that bear his influence. Whether it's to inject realism into a scene or to offset production costs, when Jonathan Jackson as Kyle Reese slips on a pair of Nike Vandals in The Terminator, or when Jerry Lewis eyes a box of Dunkin' Donuts in Hardly Working, whatever you think of product placement, that was thanks to Robert Kovoloff. While doing research for this episode, there's one final detail I came across about Kovoloff's career that I think's worth noting, and that was when he, like so many others, passed on the opportunity to place his clients Switzer Clark's Milk Duds in a key scene in Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. In a 1984 interview with Advertising Age, Kovoloff said, "Since the script featured an ugly little monster, it was felt that the film would not be a proper setting. As it turned out, E.T. became one of the world's most lovable little monsters. It was a very big marketing mistake." M&M's, they'd also passed on the opportunity. Instead, the placement went to Reese's Pieces, a little-known candy that went on to enjoy a huge sales increase and represents one of the most successful examples of product placement in film history. Pretty in Podcast was written, produced, and performed by 517, which is me. For more images, information, and sources, see prettyinpodcast.com. For this episode, I've rearranged and repurposed some direct and indirect quotes attributed to Kovoloff and presented them as direct quotes, as performed by me. While I've tried to maintain the original intent to read the interviews in their original context, please refer to the original sources. A very special thanks to Stacy Kovoloff, who reached out to me with a few corrections and insights after hearing an earlier version of this episode. In one interview, her father, Robert Kovoloff, had said to an interviewer that he was trained at Fort Bragg and spent 8 years in their Psychological Warfare Division, or PsyOps Division, and Kovoloff translated this knowledge into the advertising industry. None of this was true, though it did create a fantastic mythology. Stacy Kovoloff is an educational consultant and advocate working in Los Angeles. You can see her work and reach out to her at schoolshopla.com. There are now hundreds of product placement firms operating around the world. Their reach now extends to YouTube stars, award ceremony runways, television and film, and each one angling to get the most for their client's monthly retainer. Keep an eye on future John Hughes movies in this series for product placement. For 2 further examples, look at Ferris Bueller's Day Off, in which Pepsi appears exclusively and in Uncle Buck, where John Candy embraces a box of Frosted Flakes. Mr. Mom represented an emerging zeitgeist in the mid-'80s. According to one study from the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, men in their mid-20s to mid-40s had increased the amount of housework they did by 20% over their counterparts in the mid-60s. 80% of fathers were present in the delivery room compared to 27% a decade prior, and most new fathers were changing diapers. That's it for Pretty in Podcast, and if you like the show, give it a rating on iTunes or tweet an episode to your friends and be sure to tag @PrettyInPod. I also occasionally go back and update prior episodes' pages with new information and images, so there may be something you might have missed. And the next time on Pretty in Podcast, I'll look into the production and development of Mr. Mom, and how it almost, but not quite, embraced 1980s feminism. Mr. Mom was reissued recently on Blu-ray from Shout Factory and is probably available in a few other places.
Well, some people like Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers? I love Kenny Rogers. What's so funny?
Nothing.
Mr. Mom. Woo! Perfect.
Where's Bobby keep the extra diapers? Hey! Cowards.